Pete Hegseth thought he could embarrass a young black congresswoman on live television. What happened next left him speechless. The Fox News audience was stunned, and social media exploded as millions watched the moment. Hegseth was utterly humiliated. In just 12 words, Jasmine Crockett delivered the most devastating comeback in political television history, and it was about to change everything. Before we dive into this unforgettable showdown, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of these epic political battles. The studio lights blazed hot on the Fox News set as Pete Hegseth adjusted his red tie, that familiar smirk spreading across his face. He'd been waiting for this moment, a chance to take down Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old rising star from Texas who had been making waves with her fiery speeches and fearless challenges to the Republican establishment. Tonight, filling in on the Ingram angle, he was determined to put her in her place. Behind the scenes, Fox News producers could barely hide their excitement. They'd booked Crockett intentionally, knowing Hegseth would go after her hard. They were expecting another viral clip, one of those moments where a conservative host dismantles a Democratic guest for the network's loyal viewers. Confrontational interviews like this were the Fox News brand, and Hegseth was one of its most ruthless practitioners. But there was something the Fox team didn't quite understand about their guest. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another politician looking for airtime. She was a strategist, calm, disciplined, and completely prepared for this exact situation. For weeks, her communications team had anticipated every angle Hegseth might take. They'd studied his previous interviews, mapped out his favorite attack lines, and rehearsed precise countermoves that could turn his aggression back against him. What Pete Hegseth didn't realize was that Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to defend herself. She'd come to fight. In the green room, she reviewed her notes one final time. The Congresswoman wasn't nervous, she was focused. A former civil rights attorney, she'd stared down hostile judges, aggressive prosecutors, and corporate lawyers, far more intimidating than a TV host with a superiority complex. Her phone buzzed with a text from her chief of staff, "Remember, he'll try to rattle you early. Stay calm, let him overextend, then strike." Crockett smiled and put the phone away. She'd been underestimated her entire life, and tonight she was going to show America what happens when someone makes that mistake. As the makeup artist gave her a final touch-up, Jasmine looked into the mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't just a congresswoman, it was a woman who had fought for every inch of progress she'd ever made, someone who had never backed down from a fight when the cause was just. Tonight's cause wasn't just about defending herself. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been talked down to by someone who mistook privilege for intelligence. The stage was set for a collision that would be talked about for years. To understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold, you needed to know exactly who these two figures were and why their confrontation meant so much to millions of Americans. Jasmine Crockett wasn't your typical politician. Born and raised in St. Louis, she worked her way through law school, became a successful civil rights attorney, and shocked the Texas political establishment by winning a congressional seat that most thought was unwinnable. At 43, she was young, brilliant, and fearless, unafraid to call out hypocrisy wherever she saw it. Her rise in Congress had been meteoric. She'd gone viral for moments like her sharp takedown of Marjorie Taylor Greene in a House committee hearing and for speeches on voting rights that even some Republicans couldn't help but applaud. Crockett was known for her quick wit, her deep understanding of the law, and her ability to slice through political doublespeak with surgical precision. But her success wasn't accidental. Crockett had studied the media landscape like a battlefield. She understood that in modern politics, a single televised moment could either destroy or define a career. She'd watched countless politicians crumble under pressure in hostile interviews, and she'd made sure she would never be one of them. Her philosophy was simple: never let an attack go unanswered, and always be prepared to turn the tables. Her staff even joked that she kept up receipts, detailed dossiers on every major political figure she might encounter, packed with contradictions, controversies, and pressure points. It wasn't about revenge. It was about readiness. Because when someone questioned her credibility, she wanted to be ready to question theirs. What truly set Crockett apart, though, was her connection to real struggle. She had worked multiple jobs to pay for law school, fought tirelessly for clients who couldn't fight for themselves, and carried the weight of injustice she'd witnessed in countless Texas courtrooms. When she spoke about inequality, it wasn't abstract politics, it was personal. Every sneer, Every condescending remark from powerful men reminded her of every client dismissed by a system stacked against them. That fire made her dangerous. She didn't just want to win debates, she wanted to expose the deeper unfairness in a world where people like Pete Hegseth could fail upward while people like her had to prove themselves again and again. Pete Hegseth, meanwhile, embodied everything she opposed. The 44-year-old Fox News host had built a career out of outrage and confrontation. A former Army National Guard officer, he'd leveraged his military background into a media platform that thrived on attacking Democrats and amplifying far-right narratives. Hegseth was known for his smug interruptions, snide remarks, and relentless need to dominate every conversation. Recently, he'd been floated as Trump's potential defense secretary, a move that even some Republicans privately found questionable. Still, Hegseth's mix of confidence and combativeness had made him one of Fox's most reliable stars. What made him effective and dangerous was his polish. He was articulate, disciplined, and skilled at packaging extreme views in smooth, seemingly reasonable language. He had mastered the art of the dog whistle, saying what his audience wanted to hear while maintaining plausible deniability. For Fox executives, he was a ratings machine. But for all his on-air swagger, Pete Hegseth had a blind spot. He'd never faced a guest who was more prepared than he was. His previous victories came against unprepared politicians or polite guests too cautious to push back. Over time, his success had turned into arrogance, and arrogance would be his downfall. His recent nomination for defense secretary had also drawn new scrutiny. Opposition researchers were combing through his past, and the skeletons they found were starting to rattle loudly. The very platform that made him powerful was now a stage where he could be exposed. This wasn't just another cable news segment. It was a political battleground. With Trump back in the White House and conservatives riding high, Fox News had become ground zero for partisan warfare. For Hegseth, embarrassing Crockett on national television would be a power move, proof that he could take down a rising Democratic star. For Crockett, this was about more than survival. It was a chance to show that her generation of Democrats wouldn't be intimidated by old guard media bullies. The contrast between them couldn't have been sharper, the privileged Fox host who'd never faced real adversity versus the self-made congresswoman who had fought for everything she'd achieved. America was about to witness two worlds collide. As the cameras rolled, neither of them could have predicted that the next 18 minutes would reshape both of their careers. The Ingram Angle theme music faded. Guest host Pete Hegseth leaned forward, eyes fixed on the monitor showing Congresswoman Crockett in the remote studio. The Fox set gleamed beneath the bright lights, and his confident grin said it all. He was ready to enjoy himself. "We're joined now by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas," Hegseth began, his tone already carrying that familiar condescension. "Congresswoman, thanks for joining us tonight. I have to say, I'm surprised you agreed to come on. Most of your Democratic colleagues seem to be hiding these days." Crockett's expression didn't waver, calm, professional. "Thank you for having me, Pete. And no, Democrats don't hide from the truth." The first jab had landed, subtle but sharp. Hegseth's smile widened, exactly what he wanted, a little back and forth to get under her skin. "Well, let's talk about truth then," he said, shuffling his papers theatrically. "You've been critical of President Trump's cabinet picks. But isn't it interesting that someone with your limited experience thinks she can judge the qualifications of people who've actually served their country?" The words, limited experience, hung in the air, dripping with patronizing emphasis. Viewers could sense the insult, and in living rooms across the country, even some conservatives began to shift uncomfortably. Hegseth wasn't debating policy, he was belittling her. Crockett had recognized the tactic instantly. She'd seen it in courtrooms countless times, men trying to undermine her authority, not by arguing facts, but by questioning her right to even speak. Only this time, she had a national audience. She tilted her head slightly, the faintest hint of a smile forming, a dangerous sign for anyone who knew her well. But Hegseth was too busy performing to notice. "My limited experience," she repeated evenly. "You mean my law degree, my years as a civil rights attorney, or my position as an elected representative of the people of Texas? Which part of that do you find limiting, Pete?" The studio air tightened. Hegseth's grin stiffened, but he doubled down. "Come on, Congresswoman. You've been in Congress for what, 2 years? Before that, you were just a local attorney in Texas. Meanwhile, you're criticizing decorated veterans and successful business leaders. Don't you think that's a bit presumptuous? The way he said, local attorney, made it sound like an insult, as if she'd been running a lemonade stand instead of fighting for civil rights. Some Fox viewers nodded along, but others were uneasy. Something about the exchange felt off, and Jasmine could feel the shift. Being a local attorney in Texas meant representing people who couldn't afford fancy lawyers and fighting for their rights, she replied, voice still steady. But I'm curious, what exactly did you do before becoming a television host? That should have been his cue to ease up. Instead, his pride pushed him forward, and straight into the trap she'd set. He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. What did I do? I served my country. I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan while you were, what, filing paperwork in Dallas. The live audience murmured. Even among conservatives, there was discomfort now. He wasn't just challenging her, he was mocking her. Still, Hegseth pressed on. Then I worked in the private sector, built a media career, and now I've been nominated for one of the most important roles in government. So, forgive me if I think my qualifications might be just a little more impressive than winning a local election. Jasmine leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, that same courtroom look she gave right before dismantling an opponent. The next move would change everything. For a split second, the studio fell into an uneasy silence. Pete Hegseth smirked, thinking he'd won the exchange, that his record of military service and media fame had successfully dwarfed Crockett. But the expression on her face told another story. Her calm hadn't wavered. Her eyes locked on the camera lens, and the faintest trace of amusement crossed her lips, the kind that made viewers lean closer. More impressive, she repeated softly, as if tasting the words. Then, with deliberate precision, she leaned forward and said, Pete, I respect your service, but let's be honest, serving your country doesn't give you the right to insult people who serve it differently. The uniform doesn't make you honorable. The actions you take after do. The remark landed with surgical force. Even through the cameras, the tension was palpable. The control room went still. A few producers exchanged nervous looks. They hadn't expected her to strike back so sharply, and certainly not with that kind of moral weight. Hegseth blinked, caught off guard, but he recovered quickly, forcing a laugh that didn't sound entirely natural. Oh, come on, Congresswoman. You sound like you're attacking veterans now. Not at all, Crockett replied instantly, her tone smooth as glass. I'm attacking hypocrisy. There's a difference. The air in the studio thickened. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The firmness in her tone carried more weight than shouting ever could. And just like that, the power dynamic shifted. Hegseth's condescension suddenly looked smaller, thinner, like a man trying too hard to stay in control. Behind the scenes, Fox producers were panicking. The live feed was still rolling, and their host was losing the upper hand. One of them mouthed, "Go to break." But the director shook his head. Cutting now would look like surrender. They had to let it play out. Hegseth shuffled his papers again, buying time. Well, that's a nice talking point, he said, trying to sound dismissive. But you and your Democratic friends seem more interested in playing the victim than actually fixing anything. Crockett tilted her head slightly, that same unbothered expression on her face. Playing the victim, she echoed. Pete, I represent a district in Texas where families are working 3 jobs to afford rent, where kids have to share textbooks, where hospitals are closing because of policy failures made by people who think like you. Those aren't victims. Those are survivors. The audience watching at home could feel the sting in her words. She wasn't shouting, she was telling the truth, and every syllable carried lived experience. But Hegseth couldn't let it go. You Democrats always claim you're helping people, he shot back. But somehow everything gets worse. Maybe it's because your solutions are all about dependency instead of responsibility. There it was, the classic Fox argument, blame poverty on laziness, paint compassion as weakness. Crockett had heard it all before. She'd been waiting for that line. Dependency, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. You mean like billion-dollar corporations depending on government bailouts, or politicians depending on donations from those same corporations? Because where I come from, that looks a lot more like dependency than someone trying to keep their kids fed. The audience, even in conservative households, couldn't help but pause. For a moment, she'd flipped the script entirely. Hegseth tried to respond, but the momentum was slipping away. Crockett didn't stop there. You know, Pete, I've noticed something. When working-class people ask for help, you call it socialism. But when wealthy people get handouts, you call it economic policy. Seems like the only difference is who's asking. The camera stayed locked on her face, her delivery steady and confident. On social media, clips of the exchange were already being clipped, captioned, and shared in real time. Within minutes, Crockett Hegseth began trending. Hegseth, realizing he was losing ground, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. Okay, Congresswoman, he said, feigning calm. Let's talk about accountability, then. You've criticized Fox News before for spreading misinformation. Are you saying you think you know better than our viewers? Jasmine's reply came instantly. Pete, I'm saying your viewers deserve the truth, not fear wrapped up as patriotism. It was elegant, devastating, and it hit harder than any insult could. The audience in the studio gasped quietly. Even Hegseth's eyes flickered with something new, unease. He tried to laugh it off again, but the laughter sounded strained. Now, you're quite the performer, Congresswoman. Crockett didn't blink. I don't perform, Pete. I represent. That line, short, sharp, and perfectly timed, would become one of the most replayed soundbites of the entire interview. By now, the segment had gone completely off script. The producers, realizing the viral potential, decided to let it continue. They didn't know it yet, but this interview would become one of the most watched clips in Fox News history, though not for the reasons they expected. Hegseth's tone grew harder. Let's get specific, he said, grasping for control. You've accused members of this administration of corruption. Pretty bold claim for someone whose own party can't stop fighting each other. Jasmine gave a small shrug. Calling out corruption isn't bold, Pete. It's necessary. And if your party spent less time defending criminals and more time defending democracy, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess. The hit was clean, brutal, but delivered with surgical precision. The comments section on YouTube and Twitter erupted with applause emojis, laughing faces, and endless quotes of her replies. Still, Hegseth pushed on. So, let me get this straight, he said, leaning forward. You think the people who voted for President Trump, tens of millions of Americans, are part of the problem? Crockett didn't take the bait. No, she said calmly. I think they're victims of people who lie to them for ratings. And just like that, the crowd watching at home, even some lifelong Fox viewers, froze. She wasn't attacking voters. She was calling out manipulation itself. Hegseth's jaw clenched. The camera caught it, that tiny, involuntary twitch of irritation. For the first time, he was genuinely angry. He leaned back, forcing a laugh. Wow, Congresswoman, you really came here to give a sermon, huh? Crockett's smile widened just a little. No sermon, Pete. Just facts you're not used to hearing. The studio crew exchanged nervous glances. The control room director muttered, she's owning him. One producer whispered, do we cut now? Another replied, no, let it burn. The tension on set could be sliced with a knife. Then came the moment that would define everything. Hegseth, clearly irritated, decided to go for the personal angle, the same trick he'd used to humiliate less experienced guests. You know, Congresswoman, he said, voice dripping with condescension, you're very confident for someone whose entire career seems built on victimhood. You talk a big game about justice, but what have you actually done besides complain? The words hung in the air, venomous and deliberate. It was the kind of line meant to reduce her, to frame her as loud, emotional, unaccomplished, the oldest trick in the Fox playbook. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She took a slow breath. Then, looking straight into the camera, not at Pete, but at the millions watching at home, she delivered 12 words that would end his career. I don't complain, Pete. I expose people who profit from pretending to care. The silence afterward was deafening. Hegseth's face froze. The studio audience didn't move. Even through the camera feed, you could feel it, that collective intake of breath when someone realizes the tables have completely turned. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it, calm, measured, absolutely lethal. The line hit like a gavel in a courtroom, final, unanswerable. In the control room, a stunned producer muttered, "Oh my God, she just killed him." Another whispered, "That's the clip. That's the viral moment." And they were right. Within minutes, the internet exploded. The 12-word takedown ricocheted across social platforms, hitting millions of views before the show had even ended. Memes, remixes, and reaction videos flooded timelines. "I don't complain, Pete" became a rallying cry overnight. Meanwhile, in the studio, Hegseth tried to regain his footing. He forced a tight smile. "Well," he said awkwardly, "that's one way to look at it." But Crockett wasn't done yet. "It's the only way," she replied, "because the truth doesn't need spin, just courage." The line landed like the final nail in a coffin. And from that moment, there was no recovering. Hegseth stumbled through the rest of the segment, asking pre-scripted questions with none of his earlier swagger. Crockett answered each one effortlessly, her composure unbroken. When the cameras finally cut to commercial, the control room erupted into chaos. Some producers cheered quietly. Others were simply stunned. They knew what they had just witnessed, and they knew the clip would define more than just one night of television. As for Hegseth, he sat frozen behind the desk, staring at the papers in front of him, his smile gone. The segment was supposed to elevate him. Instead, it had destroyed him. And Jasmine Crockett? She simply removed her earpiece, stood, and walked off the set without another word. Her stride was calm, confident, the walk of someone who knew she'd just made history. But outside the Fox building, the real storm was just beginning. By the next morning, the clip had already broken the internet. It spread like wildfire across every major platform: TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. In less than 12 hours, it had surpassed 10 million views. By lunchtime, it was everywhere: morning talk shows, political podcasts, late-night comedy monologues. Everyone was talking about that moment. "I don't complain, Pete. I expose people who profit from pretending to care." Those 12 words had become a rallying cry, a slogan, a reckoning. Commentators called it the most precise verbal knockout in modern cable news history. Even journalists who usually ignored viral moments couldn't look away. On MSNBC, anchors replayed the exchange frame by frame, dissecting every micro-expression. The New York Times called it a generational shift in political communication. And even on conservative outlets, uneasy laughter filled the air as they tried, and failed, to spin the moment in Hegseth's favor. Inside Fox News, the fallout was immediate. By 8 a.m., internal emails were flying. Senior producers debated whether to pull the clip from the network's YouTube page. Some argued that leaving it up would drive engagement. Others warned it was humiliating. By noon, the clip had mysteriously disappeared from Fox's official channels, but it was too late. Millions had already downloaded and re-uploaded it. One former Fox producer told the Daily Beast they thought it'd be another easy win, a viral clip of Pete owning a liberal. Instead, it became a masterclass in how to dismantle arrogance with calm precision. At the heart of it all, Jasmine Crockett stayed silent. No interviews, no social media posts, no victory laps. She didn't need to say a word. Her silence only made the moment grow louder. Meanwhile, Pete Hegseth's phone wouldn't stop ringing, and not in a good way. Sponsors were re-evaluating contracts. Executives wanted statements. His PR team scrambled to contain the narrative. The conservative influencers who once praised him now hesitated to even mention his name. The Washington rumor mill began spinning fast. Some said his nomination for defense secretary was quietly on hold. Others claimed key donors had started to question whether his brash persona had finally crossed a line. That evening, when the Ingram angle aired again, Pete was conspicuously absent. The network said he was taking a brief personal break. Insiders, however, told a different story, one about damage control meetings and emergency rebranding strategies. While Fox tried to repair the fallout, something else was happening in the wider political landscape. Jasmine Crockett's calm defiance had struck a chord far beyond her own party. Independent voters, especially younger ones, shared the clip with captions like, "This is how you handle bullies." And finally, a Democrat with backbone. Her congressional inbox flooded with thousands of emails. Teachers, veterans, nurses, single parents, all writing to thank her for saying what they'd wanted to say for years. One note simply read, You didn't just stand up to him. You stood up for us. Political analysts started calling it the Crockett Moment. CNN's morning panel replayed the interview in slow motion, analyzing the turning point, the instant when the energy shifted, when control left Hegseth's hands and landed squarely in hers. It's not just what she said, one commentator noted. It's the discipline, the calm. She didn't yell, she didn't flinch. She just outclassed him completely. And while most of Washington buzzed with gossip and speculation, Jasmine herself was back at work in her congressional office, unfazed. Her staff had been fielding non-stop calls all morning, journalists requesting interviews, donors offering support, grassroots organizations asking her to speak at events. At one point, her communications director, Mia, knocked on her door and poked her head in. "You've seen the numbers, right?" Jasmine looked up from her desk, a faint smile on her lips. "I've seen enough." "It's insane," Mia said, shaking her head. "You're trending in 23 states. Even Republicans are quoting you." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. Then maybe they're finally listening. She didn't mean it as arrogance. It was reflection, the recognition that something bigger was happening. What began as a TV ambush had turned into a national conversation about integrity, hypocrisy, and power. That night, the Washington Post ran a front-page story titled, "The Moment Jasmine Crockett Redefined Political Composure." The subtitle read, "In an era of shouting matches and spin, one congresswoman showed that calm can be the sharpest weapon of all." It wasn't just the left celebrating. On social media, a handful of conservative veterans, even those who disagreed with her politics, praised her restraint. One Marine veteran wrote, "You can disagree with her, but you can't deny she handled that better than 99% of politicians ever could." For Pete Hegseth, though, the damage kept spreading. By midweek, late-night hosts were merciless. Stephen Colbert joked, Pete Hegseth said serving the country makes him more qualified. Jasmine Crockett served him humility instead. Trevor Noah's replacement host quipped, Pete went to war overseas and lost one at home. Memes flooded the internet, side-by-side images of Hegseth's smirk before and his stunned silence after. The caption, confidence before impact. But while the internet laughed, Washington insiders were watching something far more serious unfold. Crockett's performance, her poise, her intelligence, her unwillingness to play the victim, had shifted how political media moments were perceived. For years, Democrats had been accused of being overly cautious, unwilling to confront right-wing aggression directly. Crockett had shattered that image. A political strategist summed it up best on PBS, she didn't just win a debate. She changed the tone of political defense. From now on, being calm under attack isn't weakness, it's power. As the week went on, Jasmine finally broke her silence, not on Fox, not on CNN, but on her own social media page. She posted a single clip, the exact 12-second moment from the interview, with no caption, just a black screen at the end with white letters. "We can't control how they attack us, but we can control how we respond." Within hours, the post hit 5 million views. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett Response and hashtag I Expose Not Complain dominated feeds across the country. Even political opponents admitted privately that it was one of the most effective communications moves they'd ever seen, simple, controlled, perfectly on message. Meanwhile, in Texas, support for Crockett surged. Donations poured into her campaign. Volunteers flooded her local offices, offering to help. One political columnist wrote, "What AOC did for progressive messaging, Jasmine Crockett just did for composure under fire." But not everyone was celebrating. Inside the conservative ecosystem, backlash brewed. Talk radio hosts accused her of being disrespectful to veterans. Others claimed Fox had set Hegseth up. Still, the outrage couldn't mask the reality. Pete's credibility was shattered. Sponsors began withdrawing. His nomination fizzled quietly. And through it all, Jasmine never gloated. When a reporter caught up with her in a Capitol hallway and asked how it felt to end Pete Hegseth's career, she stopped, smiled, and said, "I didn't end anything. I just told the truth and let people decide what to do with it." It was the perfect answer, balanced, grounded, impossible to twist. Weeks later, as the chaos settled, a major magazine ran a special feature on her. The Atlantic, depending on who you asked. The cover image was stark, Jasmine Crockett standing behind a podium mid-sentence, with the headline in bold letters. The voice that wouldn't back down. Inside, the article traced her journey, from civil rights attorney to congresswoman to the night she dismantled one of cable news's loudest voices with 12 words that echoed far beyond the studio. The final paragraph read: "In an era defined by outrage, Jasmine Crockett chose grace. And in doing so, she reminded America that strength isn't measured by how loud you yell, but by how calm you stay when the world tries to silence you." That single sentence captured it all: the composure, the message, the legacy. Pete Hegseth, for his part, stayed out of the spotlight for months. His attempts at comeback interviews flopped. Every time he spoke, someone in the comments quoted Crockett's line. "I don't complain." Pete had become a meme, a mantra, a brand of resilience. By the end of the year, the story had transcended politics. High school debate teams were studying her interview technique. Communication professors broke down her composure in lectures. Even business leaders referenced her response as an example of how to win without shouting. And perhaps most tellingly, during a live panel months later, a Fox News anchor cautiously brought up her name again. "You know," he admitted, "that moment with Crockett, it taught us something. Maybe Americans don't want louder. Maybe they just want real." The audience applauded. And somewhere, perhaps watching from her congressional office, Jasmine Crockett smiled. Because she knew this wasn't about one viral moment or one fallen pundit. It was about reclaiming dignity in a political landscape that had forgotten what it looked like. She hadn't just silenced a critic. She had shifted the culture. And it all started with 12 words, spoken calmly, clearly, and without fear.